time now for our press review, and for that I'm joined in the studio now by Erin Ogunkoye. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Hexie.
We're starting off with our top story today, of course, those Iowa caucuses. Very few surprises, a very, very good night for the former President Donald Trump.
Indeed, because he did finish, as expected, ahead of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley to win the Iowa caucus. The New York Times today pointing out that it's no small feat for the former president, as he, of course, lost the caucus there 8 years ago. The paper says then, regardless of what happens next, his victory marks a rather spectacular political comeback, at least for someone whose political career appeared for a split second to be in tatters. The paper also says that his victory marks a repudiation of the rituals of campaigning in Iowa, Trump winning by a landslide there, even though he didn't do much campaigning or indulge in traditions like the other candidates did. Now, the Washington Post takes a rather interesting look at how the different demographics voted. While Nikki Haley won most of the caucus participants that describe themselves as moderate or even liberal, as well as those who accepted Biden's 2020 win, Donald Trump, for his part, won most of the other demographics. That includes those who are over the age of 45, 60% of those without a college degree, those describing themselves as very conservative, white evangelical Christians. And I think it's worth adding as well that the majority of Trump's supporters said that immigration and the economy were the biggest deciding issues for them in choosing which candidate they thought would do the best job.
So, of course, a huge amount of excitement around these caucuses. But it's important to say that the Iowa caucuses don't always do the best job of picking the person who ultimately goes on to become president.
Yeah, an editorial to that point in CNN today argues that the process is deeply flawed. It cites numerous examples of that. The wrong Republican winner was initially declared in 2012, while in 2016 and in 2020 as well, glitchy websites, inconsistencies in reporting data as well kind of marred the Democratic results. But the editorialist also points out that the votes only represent a tiny proportion of the state. In 2016, for example, less than 19% of voters showed up at these caucuses. And on top of that, the state simply, again, doesn't do a good job at predicting who is going to win, or at choosing the winning candidate, I should say. Ted Cruz won in 2016. That is, of course, the year that Donald Trump went on to win the nomination. And then Pete Buttigieg in 2020 beat Joe Biden, even though the latter, of course, went on to become the nominee and win the election. So it doesn't necessarily mean much yet at this stage that Donald Trump won the Iowa caucus.
OK, Norma, we're moving now to France. Some news in the papers today, a very much declining birth rate for yet another year.
Yeah, Hexie, that's because this Tuesday, France's National Institute of Statistics will be publishing its 2023 demographic report, and it's indeed expected to show that birth rates in France are declining for a second straight year. This after 2022, which already saw a pretty historic decline. The latest fertility rate then is expected to be under 1.7 children per woman. That's compared to 1.8 the previous year. It's on the cover of the Christian paper La Croix today. And demographers for now say that there's no reason to necessarily be alarmist. They say that this is cyclical. Birth rates are probably going to continue to decline for the next 7 to 8 years, they say, before climbing again between 2030 and 2035. Still, the piece does point out that this does have important stakes for a country's future. It could have consequences on things like retirement, the closure of educational establishments, economic growth, public finances, and innovation. Many sociologists in the piece then saying that it is important for the government to put policies in place that allow parents who would otherwise want to have more children to do so.
Oh, staying now with the French papers, Erin, you found 2 articles today on declining stability on the African continent.
Yeah, I'll start, Hexie, with Libération. This is from today's edition. 84% of the Blue Helmet Forces, the UN's Blue Helmet Forces, are on the African continent. But from Mali to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the UN's peacekeeping missions are increasingly criticized for failing to adequately protect civilians, which is, of course, their main role. The piece says that they're often often simply guarantors of a fragile status quo at best, and at worst, passive witnesses to worsening situations in which civilians tend to pay the highest price, of course, with their lives. Now, failure to play a more decisive role in Mali, which was one of its most important missions, even saw the force kicked out of the country in 2023 after 10 years. There are now fears that the same fate could await the Congo, the force in the Congo, where they've been deployed for a whopping 20 years. That's not the only major concern from the French press about the African continent today. Le Monde focusing on the 6 military juntas in Francophone Africa, from the Sahel to Gabon. They all had vowed to hold elections to add a dose of democratic legitimacy to their rule. But for now, none of them appears in a hurry to do so.
Well, finally, Erin, there's a fair bit of outrage here in France as the cost of visiting the world's most visited museum has just increased, and rather significantly.
Yeah, a ticket to the Louvre went from 15 to a whopping 22 euros on Monday, Haxi, as Le Parisien tells us. Visitors obviously not happy about it. The museum has been really tight-lipped about the reasons behind it, saying simply that it's in order to maintain, a decent quality of welcoming guests, and that's really about it. I will say, Haxi, that it seems to be an exception in Europe. Tourists from places like Sweden and Madrid quoted in the piece saying that museums are much cheaper there, even though the cost is rising, nowhere near the 22 euros that they'll now have to pay at the Louvre.
A very expensive family day out. Erin Agunke with a look through the day's top stories in the international press. Thank you very much.